ourselves a Massey Ferguson T20 TVO tractor. We don't know what we're doing with it, and it doesn't start yet. It was meant to, but it doesn't. So we're going to have to start taking it apart, looking at the most obvious things to do. We're complete amateurs. We don't know what we're doing with this sort of thing, but by looking at other YouTube videos, and we've got a used manual somewhere, we hope to get it up and running. So this is the first video. We'll be taking through step by step to see what stages we need to do to get it running. Okay. Yeah, so we're just doing a few basic checks on what it might be. I think we're going to have to take the bonnet off. That's the first thing to do, just to get it out of the way, so we've got a clearer view of what's going on.
So this is the petrol tank. It's all okay, but we're going to put a bit more in. And this is the TVO tank, and we're going to put some there.
Yep. This is how the tractor looks without the hood on. We're suspecting the reason it's not starting is an issue with the carburettor, but it doesn't look in bad condition, so we're not quite sure yet.
Quite nice. And then it's going to put it in. Turn it. So as you can see, not much power going in. In fact, it seems like the battery's a bit dead, but we have been charging up, so could be an issue with the battery at this stage, we're not sure. The tractor, we still can't get it working. We're going to ask an engineer to come round and point us in the right direction. Ashley here is just taking off some of the screws behind this panel, because we've broken the linkage for the full throttle, which you can see just there. It seems to be just a bendy piece of metal, and the problem is this rod and linkage set here, which appears to be called the throttle and governor linkage, it goes all the way to the back there, is completely seized up. So because it's seized up, we've been using the throttle handle here, the accelerator, and the whole thing is snapped. So we're trying to take off this panel so we can have a better look around. This is the state of the third spark plug along, and as you can see, it is greasy, or is it wet? Testing the fourth piston along here. Got the pressure gauge in, ready to go. Ashley, go. Connection like that, we have the top left hand lead going to number 1, the next lead going to number 2, the next lead going to the 4th, and the last lead going to number 3. The coil is negative, and the left hand side of the coil, they can't see it, is positive, which is the same as the old one, because the old one is positive on the left, negative on the right. That's the 6-volt one. The tractor going at the moment, it's got an old-fashioned starter switch here, which we're going to replace with a key. And as you'll see in the last video, we've made a number of changes, and we've finally got it working. So here goes. Quicker, not that high, and yeah.
Today we're going to be talking through this Massey Ferguson T20, which is a TVO petrol engine. We're not going to talk about the Massey Ferguson 35 diesel engine today.
that's all up and running and running absolutely fine. But we're amateurs to this, and the T20, we've had a number of problems not being able to get it started since we bought it. So as you can see, it's in its bare condition at the moment with lots of things stripped out, and we'll talk through step by step what we've done so far and what there still is to do. Anyone that buys such a tractor and also can't get it started, we'll just talk through what we've done so far. So the first thing we did was to obviously take the bonnet off and to look at some of the basics. Replace the battery, so we've got a new Halfords battery there, replace some of the leads to make sure there's enough electricity to go into the starter motor. It was turning over just fine, it's making all the right noises, and we kind of really went back to basics on why it wasn't firing up. We looked at the petrol, made sure there's enough petrol going through. Our filter bowl there is a bit dirty, it's got a bit of dirt at the bottom, but it's not stopping the petrol going through at the moment, which you can find out from the carburettor, which we'll look at in a minute. But what we realised was the main problem was the spark plugs. We weren't getting a spark out of the spark plugs. Actually, just pass me a spark plug. So we replaced the spark plugs, replaced the leads. It's very easy to buy the wrong cap for your distributor. So we bought the wrong cap because the distributor is slightly different. Bought a new distributor, and that one didn't work because this is a distributor that has got a black and a white lead coming out of it, which is what we needed for this particular tractor, not the one with a red lead and a black lead coming out of it from a company called Power Spark, which was turned out to be useless for this tractor. But it did come with the cap and the leads, which worked out to be fine in the end. The other thing we noticed is this tractor has been converted from a 6 volt to a 12 volt in the past, but the 12 volt, this is the coil here, and it still had the 6 volt coil on it. So we got a bit of a device and said that actually replace the 6 volt coil with a 12 volt coil, since everything else in the tractor was 12 volt. So we replaced that, then forgot how to wire it all together, which took a bit of time to work out. Of course, we had the other distributor on at the time, which wasn't making any help either. So new cap, new leads, old distributor, new coil at 12 volts. Got some wiring diagrams off the internet of how to wire it together. Obviously these are temporary connections, just while we figured out the right connections. This is a positive earth tractor, and I think most of them were, unless they were specifically converted. So the voltage going into the coil here comes from the tractor itself, so the whole tractor is actually positive. So the wire comes in from the positive into the coil on the positive side, and then out from the negative into the black lead of the distributor. Then the white lead of the distributor goes into the neutral, which is essentially the ignition. So that's what we've found out about from lots of the YouTube videos and lots of diagrams on the internet. So this is all learning for us, but it now starts perfectly well. And we'll show you the other side of the tractor. Oh, just before we do, these are the old spark plugs, and you'll need something called a feeler gauge from Halfords or somewhere similar to work out the distance. So we need as ours is a 12 volt battery and a 12 volt coil, we needed a fair bit of distance, similar to this one actually now, and we replaced the spark plugs. And how to test the spark plugs, as we learnt, which would be useful for other people, would be to take the wire off, connect it to the end of the spark plug, fit it against the engine here, and you'll get a spark from the two connections there, because essentially this is being connected to the tractor, which is positive. So that's a good way to see if you're getting any spark at all, which is a good test for both the spark plug and the distributor and the coil. Always make sure, you'll see on other videos, always make sure that first spark plug is lining up directly to the first top left hand corner of the distributor. Again, do some proper research on this because it's very fiddly to get it right. We're just amateurs at the end of the day. But we have got it started, which I'll show you in a second.
So we tested the carburetor by seeing where the fuel was going into it, which this is what we tested on it. So yes, that is fuel. So we said, yeah, fuel is coming out. And
do you want to talk about the two tanks?
no, it's fine.
Well, we do need to. So there's two tanks in this TVO petrol engine. This tank is the petrol, which you use to get it started, and the rest of the big tank is the TVO, which is a kind of kerosene and petrol mix. But if you're not working it properly, you're just using it like we are, just bother with the petrol. It's easier to light in the engine, and yeah, just make sure that this fuel pipe going down to here has still petrol coming out like we said. If you're not getting any fuel into the engine, that could be the reason it's not starting, but ours seems to be okay at this stage, and they're pretty expensive to replace the carburetors. It's about £150 I think, so I'm glad ours is working okay. As at all, you'll notice there's an accelerator arm here. There's a little what do you call that there, which connects to a disc, which is usually here. Now the connection between that thing and the disc is pretty flimsy, and ours broke, so we're going to have to replace that. But the disc was getting stuck to here anyway, as someone had painted it almost shut. The disc connects to a rod which goes all the way down the engine, as we'll show you later on, which connects to this arm. That arm connects to the carburettor and the bit that lets fuel into the engine. So that's essentially how we start the engine at the moment. And there's something at the bottom there connected to the governor, which we'll talk about in a later video. Just showing you here that the tyres need replacing at some point, but they're okay for now. Here there's a few noises coming from the radiator. I think that one is at the top there. You can see it bubbling away. So that needs a new gasket, and we have bought a new gasket set, which wasn't too expensive, but obviously everything needs taking apart first. There's also water dripping from the bottom, which is either the same problem or another problem. So we might end up getting a new radiator, but they're pretty expensive. Is replace the water. Oh, it's actually working today. So currently the temperature is about 65. When it gets to 80 on this TVO petrol engine, that's when you can convert it. Well, ask the engine to start using the kerosene or TVO mix, and you just switch it over like that, but I'm not going to do that just yet. We're just going to keep it on petrol.
And this, because that I don't like.
Just bear in mind on these tractors that because it's a positive earth, if anything ends up getting connected to something that is a negative, so for example if this piece of wire touches the starter, which goes into the negative part of the battery here, you end up getting a small fire and a massive spark, as we've had on there. So just for those amateurs like us that don't know about these things, you just need to be careful not to connect anything that's part of the tractor to the negative part of the terminal there. Tractor at this stage, so the clutch is okay, it's a bit wobbly but it's okay. There's no hydraulics working in this tractor, but that'll be for probably next year. And really for us at this stage it's just around getting the electrics looking in a better working order, putting the hood back on at this stage, and phase 2 will probably be about replacing all the gaskets. We did, you just get the pressure gauge, we did see what the pressure was like in the engine, because that is a sign if we've got problems in any of these gaskets. So a good thing to buy, you can buy one of these for about 20 quid. It's a pressure gauge, and you take out the spark plugs, you stick the pressure gauge down the hole, or as far as it will go with the rubber thing on, and then see what pressure you're getting. Now according to this manual, I think you're meant to be getting about 6 bar on each of the holes roughly. We're getting about 4.5 at the moment, but as you could see before, we can still get the tractor started. So it's working, but I think by replacing all the gaskets, we should be able to get better pressure. The other problem is that all of our oil is a really, put it against the wheel, is a real kind of cloudy, milky colour. That is new oil that we've just put in, and it's still coming out cloudy. So it means we've got a pretty bad problem, leak somewhere between the water and the radiator and the oil that's going into the engine. So there's probably water and oil in the engine at the moment, which isn't great, and that's a good sign that there's a problem, some sort of leakage. Hopefully by replacing the gaskets we'll be able to fix that issue, but we'll see. This is what it looks like with the head unit off. Gasket was completely corroded, so we just binned it, and look at all that mucky oil and water. Weird. This has obviously never been opened. So just for the video diary, we decided not to take this top part of the engine block off and replace the gasket, because actually looking at the gasket, it's absolutely fine. There's nothing that leaks out of here at all, and it was incredibly difficult to, well, we've not moved it apart at all, even with all the bolts off, trying to move it, hit it with a hammer, a bit of a chisel to separate the two parts of the block, just not happening at all. So it's completely welded on, which actually I don't think is a bad thing. The engine does run, so I don't think it's worth, for example, risking smashing the engine block by hammering it. So we're going to tighten these bolts really tight, because they were very tight when I took them off. We've mopped up a bit of this milky stuff, but I don't think that needed doing really. And then we're going to put the cylinder head casing on back on with the new gasket, which hopefully should stop some of the water coming in. We think the water was coming in from this bit here. Zoom out. Coming in from this bit, because the gasket was broken there, the gasket was broken here. We think water was seeping in. Other than that, I don't know where the water could be seeping into the engine. It might be some sort of corrosion or crack in the main engine block, but we'll never be able to find out. So again, as I'm not an expert at all, I think we're just going to put it back together, make it look pretty. We know it still starts, and that's fine for now until we get a few muscles.